By the end of this video, you're going to feel more confident using your Go 3, and I'm going to guide you through every step from setting up the camera, navigating through the menu system, and choosing the best way to shoot with your Go 3. First of all, remove all the labels except the one here on the sticky mount. This is reusable, and we will look at this later in the video. Place the camera in the action pod and charge using the USB-C cable. The light will turn red while it's charging. While the camera is charging, if you haven't got the Insta360 app, now's a good time to download it. And you can do that by scanning the QR code here with your phone's camera. Open up the Insta360 app and tap the camera button. Tap connect now and follow the on-screen instructions to activate and then update your camera's firmware to the latest firmware. Throughout this process, your camera does need to be in the action pod, otherwise you'll get this error come up. There are several ways to shoot with your Go 3, and the first one we're going to look at is how to use it while it's in the action pod. In the action pod, the camera snaps into place and it's held by the magnet and the clips on either end. You turn the action pod on with the on button on the side. When it's in the action pod, you'll be able to shoot with it and view your shots on the LCD screen. And all the time the camera's in the action pod, it will continue to get charged. And this means you can shoot for a lot longer. And the action pod is like an independent power bank as well. So if you don't want to use the LCD screen and you only want to charge the camera, then you can leave the action pod off, place the camera in the action pod, and then it will continue to charge. And this will maximize the number of times you can charge the camera using the action pod. The action pod is a solid unit, so you can, if you want to, simply hand hold it and flip up the screen to frame your shots, and this is particularly useful for vlogging. Ideally though, to give you more versatility, you're going to want to use this pivot stand. The stand does have a sticky mount attached under here, but if you leave the sticker on and then use the plastic cap on the end, you can use this as a simple tripod stand, or you can hand hold it. Remove this base and then you can attach the pivot stand to anything with a 1/4 inch thread, including the selfie stick. The screen will go black when not in use, and to bring it back to life you just tap the screen. And you can also send the screen back to sleep by quick pressing the on button. You can select your shooting mode by swiping in the middle of the screen and then tapping to select. So for this example we'll choose video. If you then want to change the specific settings within the mode that you've selected, you can then tap here at the bottom. You can then change your shooting ratio, so 9:16, which is the vertical format, or 16:9, which is the horizontal format. And you can select your resolution, and I would always select the highest resolution possible here, and then you select your frame rate. I would usually select 25 as this is the frame rate for the UK, but mostly you would need to select 30. Once you're happy with your settings, then swipe down where you see the line at the top of the screen. And whenever you see a line like this, either at the top, bottom, or the side of the screen, if you swipe it, this will then return you to the previous screen. You can change how wide your shot is by tapping the icon in the bottom right hand corner. Most of the time with this camera, you're most likely to be shooting in ultra or action. And then the mode that you're most likely to want to avoid is the narrow mode, because this will give you a much smaller frame. Swipe from the right of the screen and this will allow you to switch to manual mode. But if you're new to this camera, then just stick to auto for now. There are a couple of other options though on this same screen that are worth knowing about. One is the color profile. I like my colors to be quite vivid, and vivid is selected by default. But if you prefer a more natural looking image, you can change this here to standard. But not only that, there are other preset color profiles for you to try here as well. And even though they may be named biking, ocean or urban, you don't have to use them specifically in those situations. It's just a guide, so just experiment. And to come out of this menu, then just tap the middle of the screen. You can access the settings menu by swiping down from the top of the screen. And here you'll find a number of menu shortcut icons. The large padlock locks the LCD screen so that when you are handling the action pod, you can't accidentally change anything. Next we have the volume icon, which I usually set to low or mute depending on where you're filming. Then the screen brightness, and with quick capture, when this is selected, when you press the record button when the camera is off, the camera then turns on and starts recording in the mode that you've selected, which we'll look at in a minute. When in video mode, on this menu you can also change the level of stabilization, and you can choose stabilization off, which I don't suggest, or level 1, 2 or 3, and it tells you what specifically each level of stabilization is used for. To turn on voice control, you can select this icon and then the camera can be controlled with your voice. And this is handy when the camera is just out of reach on the end of a selfie stick, on a helmet mount, or stuck onto a window on the inside of your car. And you simply say start recording, stop recording, There you go. It's just started to record. Stop recording. And if it's in photo mode, you can say take a photo. The bottom right hand icon is a timed record. So you can set a time for a sunrise, for example. And while you're laying in bed, your camera will turn on and start recording at the time and in the mode that you designated. Swipe across to the second page and you can set the camera to pre-record. And this will mean that the camera is constantly recording a buffer from 10 seconds to 30 seconds. And then when you press record, it will record everything in the past for the number of seconds that you've set, and it will continue to record from that point on as well. The audio icon here allows you to turn on the wind filter, but for the most part with this camera, I would leave it on stereo mode. We then have the grid icon where we can have an overlay grid on the screen. And this can help with framing your shot, but for this type of camera, you'd mainly just leave this off. And the last icon is the cog icon, which is the settings menu. And I won't be looking at all of the items in this menu, but there are a few here that are important for you to know about. So select the settings and then select general, and then we'll be going to auto power off and also auto sleep. And I usually change these to a higher number of minutes because I find it annoying when the camera is turning off frequently or the screen is constantly going to sleep. The other really important setting here is camera storage. And this is where we can format our camera's memory. So only do this if you have saved your clips to the app or to elsewhere, because this will delete everything on your camera. Now if we go back to the main settings menu, this is where we will set up our button settings. Go to the quick capture settings and then you can select which mode you want the camera to record in when you use quick capture. So remember, this is the feature when the camera is turned off and you press the record button. So select single press and then select your shooting mode, and do the same for double press. And in quick capture mode, the presses that you're setting refer to either pressing the button on the camera itself when the camera is off, or they refer to pressing this button on the action pod when the camera is off. Underneath quick capture settings, we have Go 3 button settings. And this is the same menu layout as the quick capture menu. But here we are setting what the buttons do when the camera is already on. So here we can select single press and double press as before. With the Go 3 button settings in the menu, this only refers to the button on the front of the Go 3 itself. This doesn't refer to the action pod, because when you're using the action pod, you'll be able to see which setting you're recording in anyway. Next, we've got video sharpness in the menu, and I would change this to medium. You can also change your shooting mode by pressing the Q button on the side of the camera. By default, the Q button is set to bring up your favorite camera presets. So skiing, biking, outdoors, etc. And it includes 5 custom presets that you can create as well. If you tap on skiing, for example, you can then tap the edit icon and change the shooting mode and the shooting parameters. If you tap on preset in the top left of the screen, this will change how the Q button functions. And when it says mode, the Q button is then used to scroll through and change the shooting mode each time you press it. Before we press record on the camera, let me just explain the difference between video mode and free frame mode. In video mode, you can shoot at a high resolution of 2.7K, but you have to set your stabilization, and once you've set it, the stabilization is fixed in your shot. And also you can't use horizon leveling, and horizon leveling is when the horizon stays straight no matter which way up your camera is. In the free frame mode, your resolution is lower at 1440p, but you can use horizon leveling and you can switch on and switch off the flow state stabilization. You can also reframe your shot from ultra, action, linear and narrow view, and you can also shoot at 50 frames per second. But all of this has to be applied and then exported using the app or the studio software. Now you've set up your camera, you can start recording by pressing the button on top of the action pod. So remember, this button doesn't have a double press function. And also when the camera's in the action pod, the button on the front of the camera doesn't function. The other thing to mention at this point is that the LCD screen displays the memory card storage in the top left, the action pod battery level on the far top right, and next to this is the Go 3 battery level. The second way to use the Go 3 is using the action pod as a Bluetooth remote control for the camera. Press the camera release button on the side of the action pod and take out the camera by pulling on the lens. I like to do this over my table or over a bag just in case you drop the camera. And the camera will be automatically paired with the action pod. You can now use the menu on the action pod exactly as we did before, so select whichever setting you want. But now we are able to control the Go3 camera from a distance. But in my experience though, this works much better when the camera and the remote is a lot closer together. And the distance should be constant, so don't use this when the camera is on, say, your dog or on a remote control car where the distance is constantly changing, because you will lose connection. It's important to point out here that when you're using the action pod as a remote for the camera, whatever setting you've set the action pod to, this will determine what setting you're going to record in, whether you press the record on the action pod itself or on the camera. When you're using this setup in this way, you do use more battery because you've got the camera and the action pod in use at the same time, but it did actually become my preferred way of shooting. And the third way of using the Go3 is by itself with no action pod. And this does simplify the whole shooting process because we're just using this tiny camera. And the lens on this camera is so wide that most of the time we're going to be in shot. So you don't really have to constantly check your framing. But when you do use it like this, you've literally no idea of how much battery is left. So you do have to have the action pod nearby so you can put this in and monitor how much battery and how much memory card storage you've got left on the camera. And if the action pod is close by, then when you're on a break or you're traveling between locations, you can then pop this in the action pod and recharge it. And when you shoot with the camera like this by itself, it's important that you've gone through the whole camera process that we looked at the beginning of this video. Now, if you think that you're only going to use one setting, so say free frame video, and you know that you're not going to use any other settings, then I would set the single press and the double press to that same setting. Then this way, no matter how many times you press the button on the Go3, you know that you're going to record in the correct mode. So to shoot with the camera by itself, first release this camera from the action pod, pressing the button on the side of the pod itself. And turn the action pod off with a long press of the on-off button. Now turn the Go3 camera on by long pressing the button on the front. And you can now hand hold the camera as it is, or you can use the magnet and stick it to something, or use one of the included mounts. The most versatile mount is this mount, the swivel mount, which we saw at the beginning of the video, but now we're using it attached directly to the back of the camera instead of to the back of the action pod. And you can use this as a mini tripod or as a sticky mount, or you can detach it from the base and attach it to any mount with a screw thread, including a selfie stick. Single press the large button on the front of the camera to start recording and stop recording, and then double press to access your double press camera settings that you set up earlier. And use your action pod to recharge the camera when the battery is low. You can also shoot with your Go3 using the phone app, and you'll have access to all the shooting modes, and you'll be able to start and stop recording, preview your shots and monitor your recordings and play back your clips. And to do this, connect to the app like we did at the beginning of the video. I think the introduction of the action pod has made the phone surplus to requirements for shooting, but some people may prefer to use it. And also, if you do use your phone, then you're saving the battery on the action pod. You can review your videos and photos using the action pod by swiping from the left of the screen, or you can use your phone app by selecting this circle here at the bottom, or by pressing the back arrow at the top and then selecting album. There are 3 mounts included in the box with the Go3, and we've talked about the pivot stand, but the one feature I haven't showed you is the sticky mount. So remove the plastic cover and the sticker, and then you simply press and hold the mount onto a clean dry surface for 10 seconds. You can then rotate the camera using the ball joint to your desired position. When you finish shooting, you can then remove the sticky mount, wash it with warm soapy water and wait for it to dry out. Replace the sticker to stop any hairs getting on the mount, and then put it back with the plastic cover on. If you saw my review on the Go3, you'll know that I don't particularly like relying on this sticky mount, especially with the additional weight of the pivot stand. And I'd prefer to use a clamp or a magnetic mount that screws into the 1/4 inch thread. One of the other most popular mounts that's included in the box is the pendant mount. So pull out the cord from the mount and then place it over your head. Make sure the side with the camera image on is facing outwards, and put the mount under a thin top so that it doesn't show and it doesn't flap around. Now place the camera on top and it magnetizes to the mount. And there's also an angled wedge included in the box which goes onto the back of the mount, and this allows you to angle the camera slightly up or slightly down to get a better angle for some shots like cycling. The other mount that's included is the Easy Clip. This clips to belts, to hats or to your backpack. And make sure the camera goes in the right way, as the magnet only works one way round. Once in place, you can then angle the camera to the best position. This mount is quite stiff, so when you go to adjust it, it's quite easy to accidentally press the button and start recording. So the best way to adjust this mount is to adjust it without the camera in the mount first and then place the camera in the mount, or place the camera in the mount and grab hold of the lens to move the mount around. It makes it a lot easier, it gives you more leverage. So now you know how to use your Go 3, you'll want to know what type of shots you can get, so you want to watch this video next. If you have any questions, please post them in the comments. My name's Rich, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.